Hello, everyone. Good morning from Monaco. It is now 11:57 a.m. Let me know in the comment section where you're from. And today's topic is about how I got 1 million, actually, how I got 10 million from one introduction because a Wall Street billionaire offered us $30 million for a deal. And before I get into it, actually, I was recording just now and I realized that I forgot to put myself on the stage on StreamYard. And that's why if some of you actually viewed the video, it was black. So here I am now, recording. Everything's good now. And I have so much to share across the board globally. So many releases that I won't stop until it's fully released. So stay tuned. So stay tuned till the end of today's video because there will be one major release for today. And so basically, before I begin on that story, the whole idea of this video is how I connect buyers and sellers in the off-market luxury opportunities across different asset classes, and how you put the buyer and seller together being the connector, and that's how you get 6 to 8 figures in seller's commission or buyer's fee. So the reason why it is so lucrative is because it is off market. And imagine, like, most of us know what on market is. Those are like your listings, basically anything that is publicly available or listed that everyone knows. But off market, it's more exciting because these are assets that no one knows publicly. And that this is why it's so enticing to buyers who are willing to pay large amounts of money to get what they want. Because firstly, it is very hard to find. And secondly, there's only a finite number of them. And that's why it's off market opportunities. So what exactly are off-market opportunities? And when I mentioned about on-market, those are like, your real estate listings, that your car listings, that everyone knows. And in that kind of market, the power dynamics are more like buyers chasing sellers, because you have, sellers chasing buyers, because you have so many sellers who list their products online, and you only have like maybe a few buyers, and that's why you have all the sellers chasing the buyers, and the buyers are the one in power. So the sellers have to convince the buyer why they have to spend. But in the off-market world, there's a lot of money being thrown around. So it's more of all the buyers are competing with each other for a finite number of sellers, because these asset classes can be, say, a 5 in 5 hypercar in the world that maybe was once driven by a prince of Saudi Arabia, for example. Or it could be like maybe the 3 rarest watches in the world under Richard Mille. Or it could be say a Four Seasons hotel in Europe. Like, there's only a finite number of it, right? And compared to on market where there's like so many condos or so many houses, these are finite numbers. And when it's finite, you make the supply scarce. Almost like the concept of diamonds, like how the De Beers family actually control the prices of diamonds by making it scarce. So in the off-market world, it's very similar. It's just that it is like a finite number. Like there are only so many number of hotels, Four Seasons hotels in Europe, for example, right? So this is where the buyers, they chase the sellers, and the sellers are the ones in power, because there's a lot of money being thrown around by the buyers, and the sellers get to choose who they want to sell. So in the off-market world, it's a flip equation, and most of the time it's a flip power dynamics compared to what's on market and what's publicly available. And that is what makes the off-market world so special. And the reason why it's so lucrative is because in the off-market world, because it is not listed, it's not publicly listed, it goes by private networks and connections. And in order for a buyer to get to a seller, he has to get, say, to one person who knows someone else to get to, say, someone who's selling a Four Seasons hotel in London, for example, right? Or it could be the other way around as well. Like the seller of Four Seasons hotel in London has to know someone who wants to buy the hotel, right? But in this case, I already mentioned that because the supply is finite, it's more likely that there's a larger number of buyers chasing a fewer number of sellers. And so most of the time, the buyers, they pay what you call a buyer fee, almost like in the on-market world where the sellers, they pay a seller's commission because they are trying to convince the buyer to buy. But in this sense, the buyers, most of the time, they pay a buyer's fee because they are trying to get to something that is so-called hard to find because it's not publicly listed. And that's what makes intermediaries or connectors, or what I like to call deal makers like myself, so highly sought after for our networks and our connections, because without connections, you won't be able to get to the seller pretty much, since you can't find it anywhere online. And so I'm going to share in this video how I actually make 6 to 8 figures per deal. And I'm going to share with you some numbers so that you get a sense of what is actually possible. So I've already mentioned how the off-market world works, where the buyers chase the sellers. And it's almost like if you actually think of like a dating app, for example, right? Like, in my opinion, well, everyone's entitled to their opinions, but in my opinion, if you already have the network, you don't really have to go to a dating app to find someone. And you don't really have to like list your advertisement there. So to me, that's publicly listed. And that actually puts you on a discount rack, because that means that you don't have your own network to actually match and find the connection that you want. And so that actually will so-called drive the price down in a way. And I think in a way, it just gives off the vibe, and I don't mean in the dating app sense, but I mean when it's publicly listed for the assets, it gives off the vibe that nobody really wants. Number one, that's why you have to be publicly listed on the market. And even for art pieces, for example, art pieces usually go through private networks first. And when no one wants it in networks, and then it only goes to on market, which is the Sotheby's or the Christie's auction. And that is when it hits on the market and is publicly listed. And that's where you get to see the artwork on the website. And so it's kind of like the same concept. And that actually brings the price of the artwork down, because it's kind of like you have to go on the discount rack, and then it kind of devalues the price of the asset. So yeah, so that's I think that's the closest analogy that I can bring. Not that I'm trying to encourage or discourage anyone who uses dating apps, but just to give you an idea of like being publicly listed actually shows the perception, especially for ultra high net worth buyers, that nobody really wants to buy that item or asset, and that actually brings the price down. And when it is more paid by access in off-market networks, then it feels more exclusive, and then it drives the price up. And that's why the buyers are willing to pay a 6 to 8 figure buyer's fee to get there, no matter how many degree connections it takes, or how many connector or how many intermediaries like myself it takes to get to the seller. And okay, so a few examples of the asset class. If you want to see, I have a majority of asset class, not exclusive to that, but most of it is listed in the link down below. So you can check it out, the ticket size of the asset class, as well as the percentage commission for each asset class. So just off the top of my head, for example, one of my partners just sold a 400 million super yacht to a Singapore family office, and the commission is 7% on that. So usually for off-market luxury assets, when you connect the buyer and the seller, the commission rates are usually 7 to 10% for majority. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, for example, which I'll talk about later, but most of it is 7 to 10%. So back to my example, where I spoke about the 400 million super yacht that's being sold to the Singapore family office. if 10%, it's 40 million. So that would make it about 30 to 35 million in commission or buyer's fee for 400 million super yacht. And even if it takes 2 to 3 or even 5 intermediaries, like a chain, to get there, if you divide 35 by 5, it's 7 million each. And you are never more than 2 or 3 degree contact away from anyone, no matter where you are in the world, and no matter what positioning you are in. You're never. That is how interconnected our world is right now. You're never more than 2 or 3 degree contact away from anyone. And I've not done a deal that is longer than more than 5 people in the chain or 5 degree contact. But of course, that's not to say that it is not impossible to have a chain that's longer than 5. But usually, I don't really see having more than 5 people in the chain. So even if like you split 35 million by 5, it's 7 million each. So that's the example of super yacht. For cars and for artworks, they are usually 10% in buyer's fee or seller's commission. And it really doesn't matter which side pays, whether the buyer pays or the seller pays, because it's still the same margin of the ticket size. And sometimes you could even have both sides pay, and that's where you get double, right? Like a buyer who found you offers you 10 million, and by the time you got 2 to 3 degree contact to reach a seller, and that seller happens to be paying commission to, you add up both sides and you split equally among the intermediaries or the connectors in the chain. And I really like sharing with intermediaries and connectors in the chain, because even though sometimes the chain might be longer and the slice might appear so-called smaller, but ultimately the deals multiply because the relationships multiply, and so the deals multiply. And that's why I'm making today's video, and that's why I created the link below and the course below, so that it helps the world to become more interconnected in the off-market luxury asset space, as well as to multiply relationships to cover the gaps in the network and multiply deals so that everyone gets a split of the commission and we spread abundance across the world. And so now back to my asset class. So I spoke about artwork. So art is usually about 10%. Cars are usually also about 10% as well. And say, for example, I have this buyer that came to me recently. He is looking for a Mercedes CLK street version unconverted, and his budget is 12 million. And so if it's 10% of 12 million, then the commission or buyer's fee, I'm just going to say commission, is 1.2 million, right? And even for artwork, so artwork is like, for example, like finite. So all these luxury assets that I talk about has to be finite. So artwork like Picasso, Van Gogh, like there's only a finite number of them, right? And this can be ranging from 10 to 100 million. So I have like a basket buyer who has like a budget of like 30 million, another Picasso buyer who's looking for Picasso in the blue period with a budget of 50 million. And so even 50 million, 10% is 5 million. So even if there's 2 or 3 people in the chain, or even if there's 5 people in the chain, each person gets 1 million each. That's for art, and that's for cars. So I just wanted to show you some real life examples of the ticket size and the numbers that you could be getting. And also, so we have cars, super yachts, artwork, and hotels, real estate. So anything that's finite. So for example, trophy hotels, like 5-star hotels in French Riviera. There's only a finite number of 5-star hotels there, right? Probably not more than 10. And so usually it's around 3%, especially in the States and Europe. If, like, for example, it goes anything beyond, say, 1 billion, then because it is such a big deal, for example, I have one Four Seasons deal. I can't really mention which city it is because I have to keep discretion. Selling at 2 billion, for example. And the commission on that is 1 to 2%. So even if you calculate from that number, it's still going to be about the same as a smaller deal with a higher percentage commission, say 10%. Yeah, so that's for hotels. And also, as I was mentioning before my recording, I realized that my recording was black just now and had to re-record right now, is that I have someone who asked me to buy a hotel on the Palm Beach in Dubai. So how many hotels are there on the Palm in Dubai? There's only a finite few there, right? And that is in this aspect, the buyer pays a buyer fee, and the seller has the power to choose who to sell to. And in general, as I said, the seller, most of the time, the seller has the power in the power dynamics. So they get to choose who to sell to because there's a lot of money being thrown around. There's a lot of buyers who are chasing them. And these buyers can be ultra high net worth individuals, they can be family offices, they could be private, or they could be institutional. So like sovereign funds, pension funds, it doesn't matter. But because there's so much money being thrown around to chase these finite numbers that are so-called rare and exclusive, which are rare and exclusive actually, that is where the sellers sometimes don't have to choose to sell by the money because sometimes they don't need their money, and sometimes it's a matter of ego, sometimes it's a matter of emotions. And in this game, it is very different from the on-market world where the seller is trying to convince the buyer to buy and spend money. Because in this world, there's an abundance of money being thrown around to buy an asset class that is rare and exclusive, and the seller and you have to persuade or convince the seller why he or she should sell to your buyer. So see how it's actually flipped. And you have to understand the psychology, not just from a buyer's point of view. Yes, it's important to understand why the buyer wants to buy something, but it's also just as important to understand why the seller should sell to someone and how that piece of asset or property matters to them and how they actually choose who to sell to. And that's what makes the game very interesting because it doesn't mean that it's about money anymore, because you have to read people well, you have to read emotions well, and you have to read psychology well in order to convince the seller why he or she should sell that piece of asset. Oh, and also sports teams. So I'm actually doing a deal on sports team right now where I have a buyer from, because we're talking about psychology, where it's not just about numbers. So I have an ultra high net worth family buyer from China, and they are looking to buy sports teams. And the psychology here is that because they feel that the Chinese can't win in certain areas of sports. Now, of course, every country has its pros and cons when it comes to sports, right? They have their own strengths and weaknesses. So because they feel that they can't win in certain areas of sports, they want to own it since they can't compete or win on an international level. And that is where money doesn't really matter anymore. And they don't really look at the returns, but they just want to own something more to, you can say it's more of a bragging right, or more to make themselves feel good, or it's more of a vanity purchase. And another example is Singapore actually has a billionaire. His name is called Peter Lim. And historically, Singapore hasn't won any football matches on an international level. Like if you see FIFA, you don't see Singapore in the list for the finals. And so he actually bought Valencia Football Club. And that purchase itself is an emotional purchase because it makes him feel good that a Singaporean would actually own a football club from Europe. And that actually puts Singapore on the map since we are unable to win on an international scale. So if coming back to my ultra high net worth Chinese family from China, it's kind of like the same psychology, right? Where people are actually buying sports teams when they feel that their countries can't compete or win on an international scale. So if they can't win, then might as well just own it. And so that's for sports teams. Now let me see if I have other asset classes I want to talk about. Of course, there are also private jets and aviation assets. there are like so many kind of assets as long as it's finite and exclusive, and there's a limited number of it in the world. And we have 5-star hotels, which I've already mentioned. Well, any kind of trophy assets too, which is like, for example, the Wall Street building, which I'll be talking about shortly, or a building on Bond Street in London, or a building or bank in Para de Platz in Zurich. So these are limited numbers, exclusive and finite, which buyers have to chase and drive the prices up. Okay, so you can check out my link down below for more asset classes. So now I'm going to go into the story of how the Wall Street billionaire actually offered me 30 million. So now that you actually understand the context of the off-market luxury world, I actually got introduced to him because a hotel broker, actually he's a commercial realtor, but I'm just going to call him a hotel broker because he sells hotels in Manhattan and he's very well known in Manhattan society. And even the billionaire himself called him a staple in Manhattan society, known to broker commercial real estate deals. And so the Wall Street billionaire found the hotel broker. Actually, he knew the hotel broker for a number of years. And that hotel broker was introduced to a NASDAQ CEO who's my friend, who then reached me. So I'm the 2-degree contact away from him. And so one night at around 9:20 a.m., it just happened like weeks ago, I received a call from them. And the two of them were on the call and they introduced me to him. And he's actually looking to buy a building on Wall Street. And on Wall Street, there's only a finite number of buildings. If I'm not wrong, there's not more than 15 or 20 buildings on Wall Street. And he was looking to buy from an owner who is a sovereign fund in Singapore. And for discretion purposes, I can't say which sovereign fund. So I'm just going to say a sovereign fund from Singapore. And he was willing to offer 700 million. And not forgetting that in this game, sometimes it's not about the money, right? Because why does the Singapore sovereign fund need your money when they are worth almost 1 trillion and 700 million, even if you up the price to 1 billion, it's just a drop in the ocean, right? So in this case, you have to convince the seller to sell. And he knows that the building is vacant. It's a vacant tower on Wall Street, and he wanted to buy it in order to convert it into a hotel. And that was his whole purpose. Buy it, convert it into a hotel, buy it at 700 million, convert it into a hotel, and maybe sell it at, say, 1 billion, right? And make a 300 million markup. And so my friends and I always call him the building flipper on Wall Street because I feel that he adds values to buildings and he flips them. And so coming back to the story is that he found me and he said, hey, I've heard a lot about you and I know that you're from Singapore and I am looking for these two guys who are the head of the sovereign fund who owns this tower in Wall Street that I'd like to buy. And so he showed me the photos of these two guys. And he said that, I've been knocking on the door of this sovereign fund and nobody really opens the door because in Singapore, like, I don't really want to stereotype, but especially when it comes to like sovereign level corporate websites, like it's really ironclad and you really have to use connections. And I wouldn't just say sovereign, maybe even institutional or corporates. Like connections are more valued than going by the front main door. So, and he knows that it's ironclad because he himself had been trying to elbow his way down and unfortunately to no avail. That's why you need connections and network, and that's why it's so lucrative. Otherwise, like no one would be making 6 to 8 figures by connecting people. And so he said that he heard about me and he said that he's been calling up the offices in San Francisco and like no one really opened the door for him. And he also called up all his contacts from the West Coast to the East Coast, from San Francisco to New York, and no one have delivered to find these two guys for him so that he can buy the tower. And the thing here is that it is just, I just find it really humorous sometimes because yeah, I just find it really humorous. So anyway, he really caught almost the whole of United States in terms of his connections, and he gave people a 24-hour deadline where he wanted them to deliver and find these two guys within 24 hours or you're out. And he's just going to go to the next one. And he has like the very stereotypical Wall Street personality where if you think of a typical hedge fund guy on Wall Street, very temperamental, very volatile, very impatient. When he doesn't get what he wants, he shouts at people. So he has that kind of typical, stereotypical personality. And on the phone, he was very volatile. And well, obviously, he shouted at those two guys, but he didn't shout at me. And so he said that, look, I heard about you and I'm tired. I've been spending days trying to get there, but no one has the connections to get there. So can you please help me to find these two guys? And so I was like, okay. I say that, but I want to sleep. Like, matter of fact, it's 9:20 and I want to sleep. And in this game, you can't be enamored by people with power, wealth, or a lot of wealth or status, because when you are, you lose. So you got to put your foot down. If I didn't put my foot down there every night, people will be calling me to find this and that, and then I don't have to sleep, is it? Like, like, it doesn't matter if like you're or he's the prince of like Saudi Arabia, or if he's the president of some country, or he's like even Elon Musk or a billionaire. Like, the point is that you got to set your boundaries. And if you don't set your boundaries, then you're going to be pushed around by billionaires, going to be pushed around by family offices, by the whole world to find this and that. And it's just not sustainable in the long run. So I told him that I wanted to sleep. And obviously, you've already noticed that in this game, buyers chase because the assets are hard to get. That's the main point, hard to get and exclusive. So when I told him that I want to sleep, like, I'm not entertaining your request right now, in 24 hours. I mean, I'm not going to put myself to look for it right now. He actually said that I'm going to offer you 20 million. And so the two guys were really shocked. And they didn't dare to say anything. And they were actually very shocked that I told him that I wanted to sleep, because none of those two guys would have dared to actually tell him that. And when he offered 20 million, I just put my foot down and say, no, I want to sleep right now. That's your, with all respect, due respect, that's your business that you want in 24 hours. But for me, it's 9:20 and I want to sleep. And this is my business, right? So he said, like, he literally plunked down another 10 million and he said that I'll make it 30 million. How about that? And the two guys were just so stunned that he put down 10 million extra, which totaled to 30 million after I told him I want to sleep. And he said that will make it 10 million for each of you. Because in the chain, usually I split it equally by the number of connectors it takes to connect the buyer and the seller. So there's hotel broker, Nasdaq CEO, and me. So 30 million, and then he says, so 10 million for each of you, right? So I told him, okay, I'll take on your 24-hour deadline, but right now I'm going to sleep. And so he said, okay. And actually, within 12 hours, I actually found the two guys, and I did sleep. And I just put it out there in my network. And I said that, look, this is 30 million. It doesn't matter how many degree or how many intermediaries or connectors it takes to get to those two guys. We're just going to split the 30 million equally. And so in front of me, there's hotel broker and Nasdaq CEO. And behind me, there is my partner, my contact in Switzerland. And then he knows someone who is in the rare watches world in Singapore who deals with these two guys. So in total, there are 5 people, right? And so I came back. So the next morning, I actually came back to the hotel broker and the Nasdaq CEO. And I said, like, look, here's my strategy before I talk to him and tell him that, hey, look, after weeks of you finding, like, I'm the one who managed to find the two guys right now, but having observed how he actually plunked down an extra 10 million when I told him that I wanted to sleep, just like how, you know, you go to a restaurant and you order a burger and then you have toppings, right? You have like the tomato slices. Oh, you want to add tomato slices? Okay, that's like an extra, like what, $2? Do you want to add like Swiss cheese? That's like an extra $5, for example, right? Or if you go to like a hot pot restaurant, oh, do you want to like add on like enoki mushroom? That's like an extra like $10. Do you want to add on like this like extra sauces, right? It's like an extra $5, like whatever. Like the point is that he added that 10 million on like he was adding toppings on the burger. So I said, so this is my strategy and this is my plan. And when we are on the call, I'm going to be the one talking and you guys just keep quiet. And so my pitch was that 30 million, I found the two guys. So if you want extra 10 million, top up an extra 10 million, I'll warm the relationship for you. Otherwise, you go on a cold, clean slate and you go try to close yourself because, like I say, it's not a matter of money. It's a matter of whether they like you or not and whether you're able to persuade it. And then add on an extra 10 million. And also, with all respect, you don't know the Singapore culture. And I know the Singapore culture better than you. So I'll be able to better warm up the relationship for you, right? Especially when money or numbers, it's not the majority part of the game here. And then, so that makes it 40 million. And then adding another 10 million if you want me to front you to close the deal for you and go to Singapore and close the deal for you. And that means 50 million in total for the deal close, right? For deal closure, where he successfully buys the hotel, the building on Wall Street, where I convince the two guys to sell it to him. And because I told him, because I know the Singapore culture and I know how it works, so I'll be able to better persuade the two guys to sell the building for you. And if you decide to do like the burger toppings of 10 million, which makes it 50 million in total for deal close, then I say that if you really want me to go to Singapore to front you to close the deal for you, then I want to be sent to Singapore in a private jet. And of course, without being said, I want to be placed in a 5-star hotel. And, you know, it's so important to set the standards, especially when people want you to do things that they can't do themselves, that you know that they can't do themselves, or that you know that you have value, more value than them. And obviously, since he's a billionaire, because he's able, by the way, the 700 million that he's coming out with is from his personal pocket, and he's buying it from a corporate pocket. So that makes, obviously, if he's able to afford 700 million from his personal pocket, that makes him more than a billionaire, right? Or at the very least, a billionaire. So I say that I'm not going to sit in a private jet because I don't want to be sent to some private island against my consent. And so I want a private jet to be arranged for me by my Swiss luxury concierge, and you will be taking care of it. And that is how you actually negotiate the numbers and the requirements and spotting the value that you can actually help someone to close the deal. And so and if you see 50 million divided by 5, so that I actually told everyone in front of me and behind me, in total, like 5 of us, that 50 million divided by 5, that's 10 million each, right? And sometimes, like, yes, in this case, like, I'm so-called taking one for the team because I'm going to Singapore to close the deal. But like I mentioned, that even though sometimes, like, some people might do more or less, and sometimes there might be more people, but the relationships actually multiply and the deals multiply. So, and people actually remember you and the deals multiply. So the next time around, they're more likely to give you a deal, where they're more likely to contact you when they have a buyer or a seller. Okay, so that's that. That's the story. And also, let me see, what's my next point I want to talk about? So I've spoken about you're never more than 2 or 3 degrees away from anyone. And so never ever underestimate your network, no matter where you are or what positioning you're in. It's just like a diamond in the rough that is uncovered. And yes, the next point I want to talk about is that trust and discretion are everything. Okay, in this world, the reason why someone would find you to connect to a seller is because they trust you that you will keep their buyer's information confidential, right? You can't be going around blabbing that so and so is looking to buy something, and vice versa. The reason why a seller would actually trust you to let you know, like, say for example, why a Shangri-La hotel is on sale is because they trust you not to spread in the network or not to like be loose lip that this hotel is for sale. Otherwise, the buyers would be able to go directly to the hotel to buy it instead of honoring the connectors it takes to get there, and they would be able to bypass. So that's why trust and discretion is everything. So no names are being spread around, whether it comes to buyers or sellers, so that the intermediaries or the middlemen are being protected and respected. And also, that is what non-circumventional NDAs are for. So those are to protect non-circumvent. So no one gets to circumvent anyone when it comes to the buyer or seller, and the chain of intermediaries has to be honored for their commission or their buyer's fee. Okay, and let me see if I have anything else I want to talk about. I think that I have covered most of the points that I want to talk about today. Of course, I have so much more exciting stuff to talk about in my next few videos. Do keep a lookout for that. And if you would like to dive in deeper, and you can actually check out the link down below, the Ultra High Net Worth Dealmaker, where I show you how I make 6 to 8 figures per deal, which could happen in 1 to 3 months. And in the off-market luxury world, where I teach you how I connect buyers and sellers, and you don't need an established network. I teach you how to connect buyers and sellers to close deals across all the different asset classes in the off-market luxury world. And those are the asset classes that you can see on my landing page. It could be super yachts, sports cars, private jets, hotels, vineyards, castles, sports teams, wine, watches, Hermes Birkin bra, Hermes Birkin bag, you name it. And also, so we have 3 tiers. The first one is self-guided, and that is where you do everything, you learn everything at your own pace. And all 3 tiers have the opportunity to submit your buy request or your seller opportunity, like an off-market asset that you or your connection is selling, to me for a deal match in my network. So obviously, my team will be doing a due diligence on all opportunities submitted, be it a buyer's request or seller's request. And once there's a match with someone in my network, we will get back to you. And yeah, and this is how we actually multiply relationships and deals. And that's for the first tier. The second tier includes group coaching, includes Telegram access. And the third tier would be one-to-one with me, where I actually introduce you to all my ultra high net worth partners in my network, so that you are able to get first access priority with them, and you're able to close deals with everyone in my network or upon a successful deal match. And so ultimately, what we are actually selling and how we get paid 6 to 8 figures is that we are offering access in a very inaccessible, not publicly available world, where there are so many gaps in the network. And the winners will be the ones who are able to map out their network, which I mentioned that you don't need an existing network, because you're never more than 2 or 3 degree contact away from anyone, whether it's a off-market buyer or an off-market seller. And that's all I have today. And I look forward to reading your comments below. I do read every comment myself, and I reply myself as well. And if you are looking to make 6 to 8 figures, and if you are looking forward to get access to my network upon a successful deal match, then check out the link down below, the Ultra High Net Worth Dealmaker. And I look forward to seeing you there. And also, I have so much more to share globally, and I have so much more to release as well. So keep a lookout for that. And that's all for today, and I'll see you in the next one.